If you're watching this, you probably know the deal already. I watched some films this month, we're going to talk about them. Let's just jump into this. I know it's a bit later in the month than it is usually, but I've been busy, so yeah, I've not gotten a chance to make this video. But let's just jump into it and talk about the films that I've watched this month. On the first, I watched Godzilla vs. Kong, directed by Adam Wingard, and honestly, I barely remember this movie at all. I enjoyed it for what it was, like just a dumb, like kaiju movie. It seems to be more self-aware than any of the other movies so far in this like monsterverse thing that's going on. I've not watched the Kong movie, but I watched all the Godzilla movies and I wasn't really massively into any of them. So for what it is, it's fun, it's fine. Like I said, I barely remember the film at all. It's like a fun one-time watch, but it's nothing like substantial, it's nothing mind-blowing. It's just a decent popcorn flick. I had it rated as a 3 out of 5 on Letterboxd, but I'm not really sure if I'd stick by that. Maybe a 2.5 now, because like I said, I barely remember it at all. I enjoyed it, but I'd never watch it again. On the 5th and the 6th, I watched the 2 Paddington movies for the first time and absolutely loved both of them. I was definitely hesitant going in because I've never really had any attachment to the Paddington Bear character, even though he's been like a staple of British culture for my entire life. I was worried that it would just be like a generic family British comedy like we've seen so many times before, so I was surprised to see just how great these movies both are. The films are both filled with heart, care, love. There's just a great attention to detail in both movies. The acting and voice acting is all fantastic. The animation's really good. The comedy is fantastic. The films are just so wholesome and sweet. They're just like being hugged for 2 hours. I had an absolute blast with both of them and I absolutely cannot wait to watch them again. They're just so wholesome and sweet and they're just filled with joy, and I loved them both. I think I gave the first one an 8 out of 10 and I gave the second one a 9 out of 10. These are just great movies. On the 5th, 6th and 7th, I watched films for the Sunday Movie Marathon podcast on, I don't know what number episode it is, but you can go listen to it. It's on Spotify, YouTube, all that stuff. I'm going to plug it every single video because I might as well. On the 5th, I watched Shrek the Musical and regretted it. On the 6th, I watched Do the Right Thing, and on the 7th, I watched Shutter Island. On the 7th, I also watched Judas and the Black Messiah, directed by Shaka King, which I talked about in my Oscar video that I made, so if you want to hear me talk about that film, go watch that video. On the 8th, I rewatched Quentin Tarantino's debut Reservoir Dogs for the first time in quite a long time. I had only actually watched the film once before as a teenager, and I remember not being head over heels in love with it. I thought I barely remembered any of the film, but rewatching it, so much of the film came back to me and I realized I actually had a very good memory of the film. I just didn't realize that was it, because this is a film that there isn't a lot to it. It's only set in a few locations. There's only really a few scenes in the movie, but it's just an incredibly well written, hilarious, fantastically acted movie. It's clear that Quentin Tarantino is an incredibly talented writer, and it's crazy that his first film is as good as this. I know technically it's not his first film because he made another film that was scrapped in the end, but even if this was his second movie, it's still an incredibly well made movie, and I really loved rewatching it. I might talk about this and his other movies at some point in the future. That's something I'm mulling over at the moment, so maybe I will in the future and I'll talk about it a little bit more. But in the meantime, I'm going to give Reservoir Dogs an 8 out of 10. On the 9th, I watched The Wrestler, directed by Darren Aronofsky. This is a fantastic movie. This was another one I didn't expect to love as much as I did. I'm a big fan of Darren Aronofsky, and I really loved how pretty much all his films have their own unique style, and this is definitely one of them. It's shot basically like a documentary. It's all handheld and there's a lot of close-ups throughout. The film basically just follows Mickey around, who is this wrestler who is now getting old and has basically been told by his doctors that if he carries on wrestling, he's gonna die. At the same time, he's got an incredibly fractured relationship with his daughter that he's trying to fix, while he's also slowly falling in love with a stripper. There's a lot going on, and it's quite a dark, dour and depressing movie, but it's incredibly powerful and I just loved every second of it. The character is so good. Akiru is incredible in the movie. I highly recommend this movie if you haven't seen it. But yeah, bear in mind it's pretty dark at points, and I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I really loved it. On the 10th, I watched Orson Welles' film The Magnificent Ambersons. I believe this was his first film he made after Citizen Kane, and it was a film that was heavily interfered by the studio, meaning that the final product is not what he intended it to be. I know in the later years of his life, he came to accept what had happened a lot more, and apparently he didn't actually hate the final cut of the movie, but it wasn't what he wanted it to be. There was like an entire hour cut out of the movie, and watching it you can definitely feel that something isn't right. Although I do think it's a well-made movie, I do think there's like genuine glimpses of brilliance throughout and fantastic cinematography at points, really great writing and acting. There's just something about the film that feels off. It just feels too short. It feels like the film never really has time to breathe. You never really have time to fall in love with the characters, which is a shame because this is a very character-driven movie. It is a real shame that the original cut of the film is still not out there, because I would love to see Orson Welles' original vision in full. You can really tell this isn't the film he wanted it to be, and I think it really suffers from how much interference there was and how much was cut out of the film. That being said, it is not a bad movie at all. If you like Orson Welles and you haven't seen it, then it's pretty much a no-brainer that you should watch it. In the UK, it was alongside loads of classic movies that got added onto the BBC iPlayer for free, so I definitely recommend checking it out at some point if you like Citizen Kane, if you like Orson Welles, or even if you just like older movies. And I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. On the 11th, I watched the Shaun the Sheep movie Farmageddon, which I talked about in my Oscar video, so go check out that and I talk about it a lot more in depth in there. On the 12th, I had a pretty stressful day at work, so I decided to get home, have a couple beers and just chill out and watch some mindless comedies. The first of which was Austin Powers International Man of Mystery. I loved the Austin Powers movies when I was in my early teens, so I was really looking forward to checking them out again. I ended up rewatching the second movie as well, but that wasn't until the beginning of May, so we'll talk about that in the May video. But I just kind of felt that although the film is funny, and I did actually enjoy the first one quite a bit, I don't think it's held up that well. There's a lot of jokes that really miss, and a lot of jokes that really have aged badly, which is a shame because there's also some moments of comedic gold and comedic genius. I think the character of Austin Powers is actually a pretty great character. Although he can be very annoying, I think he can also be quite funny, and I think there's a lot of genuine heart to the character, which is probably like my favorite thing about the first movie. I also really loved Dr. Evil in the first movie. I think he was really funny. He gets a little bit more annoying, especially when like Mini-Me shows up in the sequels, but I loved him in the first film, and I loved his dynamic with his son. I thought all of that stuff was really funny. I love all of the spy parody stuff. I think it's a funny movie. I just don't think it's aged that well. There's so many jokes that made me cringe, and so much that I was like, yeah, that easily could have been cut out, especially in the first like half an hour of the film, which was pretty bad, to be honest. But yeah, it's a fun movie. I enjoy rewatching it. I don't know if I'll ever rewatch it again, but for what it is, it's a fun little time waster, and I'm looking forward to eventually watching the third movie again, even if I remember not even liking that one when I was like in love with the first two. But I guess we'll see. And I'm going to give the first Austin Powers movie a 7 out of 10. And after that, I watched Galaxy Quest, which is another movie I've not watched since I was quite young. Galaxy Quest is pretty awesome. It's like a very tongue-in-cheek meta parody of Star Trek, which is based all around the actors of this sci-fi series who actually get taken into space and have to team up to fight real-life aliens. It's quite a silly movie, but it's also very smart at points, and I think there's some great satire on not just like actors in general, but just like very specifically like the Star Trek actors and the Star Trek fandom and that sort of thing. This is like genuinely one of maybe even like the best Star Trek movie, and it's not even a Star Trek movie. There's some really great acting throughout. I actually really loved Tim Allen in this movie. movie, and I don't generally like him in anything. Alan Rickman is as great as ever. Sigourney Weaver is really good. It's just a lot of fun. I really enjoyed rewatching this, and I can definitely see this being another one that I rewatch multiple times in the future. I'm glad I eventually got around to rewatching it, because I watched it when I was like 10, 11ish, and I liked it, but it was never a film I was in love with, so it's been years since I've rewatched it. So yeah, I enjoyed it a lot, and I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10. On the 13th and 14th, I watched 2 more movies for the Sunday Movie Marathon podcast, those being Widows and Call Me By Your Name. On the 15th, I watched the directorial debut from Bob Odenkirk. Yeah, that Bob Odenkirk. Melvin Goes to Dinner, and yeah, maybe just stick to the acting, Bob. This wasn't good. It's an independent comedy from the early 2000s, which is all shot on digital cameras. It looks pretty garbage. The writing is really cringy and unfunny. I don't like saying things are self-indulgent much, but the writing in this is very self-indulgent. I think there is an interesting premise here, but I don't think anything they did with it was interesting at all. The characters were so flat and uninteresting. The comedy was really bad. None of the acting was really great. I just found the film really dull. I would never watch this again, and I definitely would not recommend checking it out. And I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. On the 16th, I watched Akiru, directed by Akira Kurosawa, and I loved it. I've been slowly getting into Akira Kurosawa recently, which you'll hear more about in the May video, and Akiru was like the first film I watched by him that I really loved. I think before that I'd only watched one movie, I think it might have been Rashomon, and I wasn't like in love with it. But I think Akiru was a really well written, beautiful, powerful movie that like mixed great social satire with genuine heart and emotion in an incredibly powerful way. If you haven't watched it, then I literally cannot recommend it enough, because it's just such a well-made movie. Akira Kurosawa was an incredibly talented director, and he shows that off in this. It's like crazy watching films like this that are just a basic drama and seeing how well he handled it. Yeah, I love this movie, and I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10. On the 17th, I watched Minari, which I also talked about in my Oscar video. Like I said, go watch that. On the 19th, I watched the new short film Save Ralph, which is on YouTube. I'm not going to show any clips from it, because I think everyone needs to go watch it if they haven't seen it. It's a great stop motion short that's all about animal testing, and it's very powerful and emotional, and it's just fantastic. Yeah, go watch it. Between the 20th and the 22nd, I watched 3 movies for the Sunday Movie Marathon podcast, those being Homicide, Vermilion Souls, and A Woman Under the Influence. And then between the 23rd and 25th, I watched 4 different movies, all of which I talk about fairly in depth in my Oscars video, so like I keep saying, go check that out. Those films are The Father, Another Round, Nomadland, and Promising Young Woman. Between the 26th and the 29th, I watched another 3 movies for the Sunday Movie Marathon podcast. Yeah, there was like very little films that I could actually talk about in this video that I haven't already talked about because of that Oscar video and the Sunday Movie Marathon podcast. But the 3 films I watched were A Ghost Story, Synecdoche, New York, and Minding the Gap. On the 29th, I also watched Waking Life, directed by Richard Linklater, which may be one of the trippiest movies I've ever seen. As you would expect from a Richard Linklater movie, this is basically just a bunch of different characters doing really long monologues which don't really seem to be about anything, but at the same time are actually about everything. The animation is like rotoscoped, and it looks very strange, and it's just a very surreal movie to watch. Although I did like the film quite a bit, I actually think I was too tired to really get the full experience, which, considering what the plot of the film is kind of ironic. So this is definitely a film I'm going to need to watch again in the future, but I'm happy to do so because it's a very well made movie. I'm also looking forward to watching A Scanner Darkly, which is like a spiritual successor done in the same style, also written and directed by Richard Linklater. I think he's a great director, and although this wasn't one of my favorite movies by him, I definitely think it's one of his most experimental and unique, and I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. And finally, on the 30th, I rewatched 28 Days Later, directed by Danny Boyle, spoil. I honestly didn't think this film held up as well as I was hoping it would. That doesn't mean it's a badly made movie or anything, because it's a very well made movie. For its time, this film was basically incredibly revolutionary. The way it's all shot on standard definition, like consumer grade cameras, the way the zombies are handled, it's all very innovative for its time, but I don't think any of it really holds up super well now. A lot of it just kind of feels pretty commonplace. Like, we've seen the fast zombie thing so many times since 28 Days Later. It's basically become the norm now. I do really love the music choices throughout. I think there's some great music throughout. There's a really sweet usage of a Brian Eno song, which I really love. I think most of the acting is really good, but there's like some questionable choices in there. I love Brendan Gleeson normally, but his accent in this film was just so bad. He kept constantly switching back into his natural accent, and it was like, what is the point in this character not being Scottish? Like, it changes literally nothing about it. It's not like it won't make sense. Like, he could easily be like a Scottish immigrant that's living in London. There was no reason why he needed a British accent. It just sounded awful. Also, the girl who played his daughter, I think it was Megan Burns, was so bad in the movie. She was laughably terribly at points, and some of the line delivery she did was just shocking. But yeah, I can kind of understand why it's still considered a horror modern classic. It's a good movie. I don't love it. I don't think it's an incredibly well-aged movie, and I do think the things that it popularized are so worn out and tired now that going back and rewatching it is just kind of painful after having it so like shot into the ground now. It doesn't feel quite as revolutionary and exciting as it did back then, but I do think it's a good movie, and I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. And there we go, another month done.